I'm just pleased to say welcome to everyone this morning, and let us welcome our founder and group president, Frank Kovacs.
Thank you, David. I thank everybody for joining today. It should be a very good program. To give you a little overview, the Breakfast Club was founded following the 9/11 tragedy to help the people that were displaced due to the tragedy and lost their jobs. Over the years, the financial, economic uncertainties, and now the pandemic has kept the need for keeping the group going. We focus on both job search as well as career management, so many of our members stay connected to us for the long term. Unfortunately, over the 20 years that we've had the group, we've actually had people come through multiple times for jobs, because in that 20-year span, after they've landed, years later, something may have happened with their company that caused them to be downsized again, or they just wanted a change and used the Breakfast Club to help them navigate either getting a new job, around upskilling and reskilling, or maybe even changing industries to one that they thought was more promising for the next stage of their career. When you join the Breakfast Club, we use a service called groups.io in order for our principal communication vehicle. We used to use Yahoo Groups, but Yahoo Groups has been retired. So once you join groups.io, that's how you get all of our emails. You, once are on that platform, can actually email everybody in the group, because everybody in the group joined just for job searching, career management help. That's what we ask that you limit any communications to on the platform. And you simply send the email from your groups.io account that you joined with to the Breakfast Club NJ at groups.io. We ask that, if you're in transition, you put a welcome message out there to everybody, introducing yourself, what your value proposition is, companies that you're targeting, so that people can help you. We have over 9,000 people in the group. Of the two primary demographics, over 800 of them are sitting C-level executives, and over about 1,000 of our members are project managers, everywhere from entry-level project manager all the way up to global heads of PMOs. So a very fertile environment, because those individuals are highly concentrated from the New York, New Jersey, Philadelphia area. And due to that, as you're going to look for a job, the number one way people get a job is by getting a referral into the hiring manager. So with having that many professionals in our network, the probability when you put out and network with them that you're looking at a targeted company, there's a high probability that they've either worked there, they know somebody that worked there, or they may work there currently. And, once you connect with them and you start to ask questions about the culture, about the inner workings of the company, it can validate that you want to target that company, but also it can give you great insights that will help out significantly with your candidacy and raise up that probability that you can get a referral right into the hiring manager. We also have a Facebook group. We have a LinkedIn group, and we have our website, of course, which is thebreakfastclubnj.com. All have very useful resources in it. When you join the Breakfast Club LinkedIn group, you can see all the individuals that are from the Breakfast Club that are in the group. You still have to connect to them one by one. So simply explain to them that you're a fellow Breakfast Club member and would like to connect to them, and usually they're very receptive. We have many of our members have over 30,000 contacts, and when you have that level of contacts and you connect to them, you can grow your network quite quickly and quite substantially. And as you're in search, you'll learn that your network is very critical. And it's very critical for you to not only make sure your resume is in good order, but many of the recruiters today highly rely on information in LinkedIn. They'll go in and they'll look at your profile, they'll look at what recommendations you have, they'll look at what skill sets you claim to have, they'll look at the endorsements against them. So it's very critical that you invest, some time to make sure your LinkedIn profile is fully up to date. It brands you effectively and has current information that will be available to the recruiters. We have a program committee, David Shuckman, who introduced me, and Jerry Payton, who are on the call, run that. They go and they look for really engaging speakers and topics on a monthly basis that basically run the gamut of both job search and career management. They do an excellent job on lining these individuals up to bring good advice and thought leadership to your search on a monthly basis. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jerry Payton, who will introduce our speaker and our topic for today.
Thank you, Frank. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming to today's presentation there, which I think is a very timely and valuable presentation for everyone. So I'm going to introduce today's speaker. Andy O'Hearn is an Associate Director of Communications and Change Management for Bayer Pharmaceuticals. He's also a LinkedIn Master Networker, trainer, and coach with more than 6,200 connections, including internationally known thought leaders, authors, and communications influencers. Andy's specialties include corporate storytelling, narrative and culture, social dynamics, behavioral economics, data visualization, search strategies, leadership, future trends, web usability, and crisis communications. I would like to now introduce today's speaker, Andy O'Hearn. Andy?
Great. Thanks, Jerry. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it. First of all, I just want to let folks that are joining the call know, and first, can everyone hear me okay? And can everyone see me okay?
I hear you.
Yes.
Excellent. Great. So one thing that I put into the chat, and you can scroll up to get it, I put in a bunch of links that if you have to leave from this presentation or you just want sort of a quick synopsis of what I'll be covering, the links are up in the chat, probably very up at the very top, so you can scroll to that and cut and paste those wherever you need to. Also, I have a Word version of my notes, which I can make available to folks separately, and obviously the presentation itself. So we have a couple different ways to get to a lot of content. But with that, let me start with, folks have probably been looking at this dog slide and saying, what do you mean dogged resolve? What are you talking about? Before the session began, we were just talking about my dog, which is a Boston Terrier. This is not a Boston Terrier, by the way, but dogs in general are the ultimate recalculators. I mean, they live in the moment. They put their acute senses to work all the time, and they strive to love unconditionally, yet they're always poised to take action to meet the moment. And we can learn a lot from dogs. And so I decided to make that sort of the theme of the presentation. But going further into that, to make this more responsive presentation, I was told, in storytelling, is the first thing you ask your end user or customers, what do you want? What are you trying to do better? How can I help? What would you like to do that you can't do now? What processes, daily routines, or approaches are you striving to improve? And is what you would like to do and where you would like to go realistic, or is it wishful thinking? And how do you know the difference? So to me, dogged resolve boils down to this. You need to listen to your instincts. You need to blaze your own trail. And very important and often overlooked, you need to stay in the game. You need to stay with it. So as I say, I consulted several different resources to put this presentation together. We're going to skip around a little bit. That's the what. But today I'd like to talk about the how and the why. And so for us to figure out this together, I consulted 4 different resources and 3 books, which which I helped to edit, and one online course, which I completed in July 2020. And as I said, the links are in the chat for that. Let me just start a little show and tell. This book is called Recalculating. And the reason I have 3 of them is because one is a library version, so you can get it from your library. If you don't have the money to outlay for the book, that's totally fine. The version I like best out of these 3 is the one that has a nice dedication from the author. So I worked very closely with Lindsay Pollack after she invited me to have a comment into her book. She said, "Oh, you know, I'm looking for some folks to give testimonials." And I gave a few, and she goes, "These are good. I'd like to include them." So, cool thing I checked off my bucket list is that I have now been published in a best-selling book. It wasn't my book. That's the next bucket list item that relates to that. But a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about that whole process. Another book that I edited and worked on was this one. It's called, can you see? Courage to Lead by my friend Bobby Cancelosi. Self-published, but very interesting. And he's got a whole series of books and a kit. So we'll talk a little about reflective journaling. We'll get into that. And then the last book came out a couple years ago. Let's try it this way. Stay on Course by my friend Julie Riga. And again, helped to work on that. We'll just touch on that briefly. And then the last course is called Virtual Communication Strategies for the or Communication Strategies for the Virtual Age, and some very good little tips as you adjust your mindset and your approach to the new reality. This will help you. So, in any case, let's start with this. So, again, listen to your instincts, recalculate, recalibrate, and I also say recelebrate. There's a quote from T.S. Eliot where he says, we shall not cease from exploration, and the end of all our exploring will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And that really is, you know, if you had to boil this book down into one sentence, that's probably a pretty good one. The next one is, this is Bobby's book, and he talks about the courage to lead. And a lot of folks have sort of shrunk into their shells during this pandemic time. And what I would encourage you to do is to resist that urge and distinguish yourself from folks that are doing that. And I'll give you a couple pointers from Bobby as to how and why to do that. And Bobby's a good case because we grew up as childhood friends, drifted apart for a while, and he was head of learning at GE. And then much later in life, he continues to have some challenges with a head and neck cancer, and he continues to fight that. So if anybody is showing courage in the moment, it's him. And then lastly, again, the book that I mentioned about Stay on Course. This is a former co-worker of mine who now works at Novartis, whose father was a famous gourmet chef, and she kind of imparts his life lessons. So a lot of good exposure to some resources for us. But let's start with this image. I don't know if you guys remember this lovely commercial from I believe it was Allstate, and you have the gentleman saying recalculating, and the woman almost steers off the road or into something. That can be the way that this whole time can feel to folks. So it's important, when we go through these P bullets that you see here, maintain a positive attitude, to know what your path is, what your destination is, what you packed, what's the shortest commute. In terms of persuasion, does your professional story still make sense? Is it consistent? To personify, to influential others see you, hear from you, get outreach from you, know, like, and trust. Perform. Have you mastered job hunting in the virtual world? We'll talk about that later, including, this video presence that we're on today. And then persevere. Can you transform an okay for now or imperfect job into an opportunity? And then perfect. Are you connecting and crowdsourcing to overcome isolation biases? So a lot to cover, but the book is a really good refresher, especially for folks that have been in the game for a little while and sort of may have forgotten to revisit some of the essentials. So I talk here about the 5 riders of the apocalypse, and they are economic, social, political, medical, and climate. 64% of employers are going to look for a new job post-pandemic. 53% of COVID college graduates are under or unemployed. So a little terrifying. In terms of auto-acceleration, the effect of the pandemic was more accelerative than transformative. In other words, it was already happening, but the pandemic just shifted it into a new gear, you know, sort of transformation on steroids. In terms of hybrid, that just means moving again from this hibernation, which we've all become accustomed to getting through the PTSD recovery. And there are some long-term effects on folks both who were impacted or afflicted with COVID, or had family members or friends who were, but even not, just sort of, you know, literally being the folks that are in the periphery of that and having to deal with all of that. AMF yo-yo. I don't know if anybody has ever worked in an emergency room. My wife's an ER doc. I'll use the pleasant version. It basically stands for adios, my friends, you're on your own. And basically what it means is there's a lot more folks that are having to sort of run their lives as a business, you know, balance the work-life thing without forgetting to take care of self-care, because the amount of minutes that have increased for the average worker is, I think it's 48 minutes per day, which is a good sized chunk. You know, it's about, you know, 1/6 or 1/7 of the usual workday that's just being appended, because without the commutes, people are like, oh yeah, sure, you can contribute that time to us as well. And then there's further things going on with diversity, equity, ethics, and inclusion. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Then the last one here is higher education and lower bar. So a lot of millennials, Lindsay Pollack, the first author, is a millennials expert, actually a generations expert. And if you've spent any time with talking to millennials, most of them are saddled with huge amounts of college debt. And so is college the table stakes? In other words, it used to be something whereas a college education was sort of further advancement. But do you just need a college education just to even be in the game at all? I think that's starting to happen. It's a new screening device, sort of like a high school diploma was, you know, not too long ago. So on this slide, you know, you see the famous visual from Alice in Wonderland, and the fact that 2/3 of folks that want to stay remote, 35% prefer it, and 30% at least till the health scare passes. So that's going to be interesting. It's already being worked out. I see it at Bear already. Every day I get a communication saying, hey, we're, you know, working towards this hybrid model, and everyone's like, yeah, don't go too fast. In terms of COVID costly, yeah, as I mentioned, unemployment, there's a lot of part-time work, there's closures, there's delayed education. Now, I happen to keep a journal. I've done it for 46 years. And I look back a year to see, you know, what the thinking was, what the mindset was. Yeah, this was the worst time. Right around this time was when everything was supposed to peak, remember? And it was just like, oh my God, this is terrible. You know, death tolls are going up by the day. The case counts are escalating. We'd never seen anything like this before in recent times. And everyone was like, where does it end? But there was always like, well, if we get through this peak, you know, get over this hump and down the other side, we'll be okay. And then we found out, well, you know, there was another side, or there's going to be multiple waves, and we're in one now. So had to change the expectations. So that gets into the reset button. The greatest global cataclysm since World War II. And basically what that means is you need to pause, reset, and reimagine, you know, our lives. So, you know, Lindsay gets into a lot of these points. Testing your edges. You know, the rule books are being rewritten, so there's no wrong answers yet, and that's good. You know, there's a lot of ways that you can experiment, and it's okay for now. You know, you're not really going to be judged because everyone's going through this together. Another aspect is health more so than wealth. Would you rather be happy, healthy, and wise, or financially secure? Ideally, you're both, but you know, in some cases, you're being forced to make a choice, at least temporarily. Exponential cross-generation. Again, I talked about you know, the dealing with the millennials. We're living longer, we're innovating faster, and we're starting to outpace, you know, mutation. Although we'll see how that goes with this virus. I just finished a book on CRISPR, which is the whole cell and gene editing therapy. So a lot of interesting developments. A lot of folks that used to code on computers are now working about the code of life, which is DNA and RNA. So you're going to be seeing more about that in the future. In terms of fluency, if you are a verbal person like myself, and you're used to expressing yourself in words, that's a wonderful gift to have, but understand that a lot more attention spans and a lot more conditioning has happened to have us respond to visuals. So if you're not good with visuals, that's a good place to up your game. And that includes video, of course. Trust or bust. So high demand, short supply. Everything's fake these days. Fake news, fake this, fake that. And so if people just don't necessarily trust the same type of resources. So if that's what you're relying on, you're going to find that you're going to need your social networks to back you up a little bit more. And that's why it's very important to connect, especially during these pandemic times. And it's challenging, but we'll talk about how to do that. Robotics. So a lot more augmented reality, virtual reality, robotics, and automation, because they're immune, in quotes, to pandemics. So you're going to see a lot more folks. I see it already with fast food restaurants. They're reconceptualizing their drive-ins, and to the extent that they can, they're going to have automation handle those things. Drones is another aspect of that. So when you see it, don't be surprised, and think about how that might impact your own situation. And then the last bullet here is ideas instead of ideologues. So a lot of dialogue now happening with the change of administrations. Where does the power and influence reside? Is it with people or is it with politicians? I think you're going to see that play out for quite a while, and that again, that's going to have implications on jobs, careers, different healthcare policy, a lot of things that you're dealing with now. So in doing this, the research for this, and then one of the links is in the chat about this. When I say rolling the dice, what does DICE stand for? It stands for Distributed Income Compensation Enterprises. So in other words, you're dispersing work in new ways. You see it already with the gig economy, but you're going to see more of that, where you have these sort of pools of resources that can be pulled in for certain projects and then dispersed, or like the way people work on a movie set. It's very intense 24/7, and then, okay, see you, you're out the door, go on to the next one. In terms of environmentalism, it's the ticking clock of climate change. Whether you agree with that or not, you're going to see more extreme weather and weather changes in places that aren't used to handling that. And again, that's going to have implications on the job situation. Technopsychology. So a lot more things going on with mental health. Certainly after the pandemic, you're going to see the implications of that. And then, the brain technology is changing. I talked about CRISPR before, which is cell and gene therapies. Some of that has to do with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and whatnot, and whether you can offset that. And then the last bullet here is algorithms and blues. And I'm a blues guy, so I appreciate this, but digital systems direct, control, and manage human behavior. And you're seeing it with the Internet of Things, and you're going to be seeing more of that, more bots, more, things that appear to be handled by human but are not. And I know all you folks are so thrilled with ATS, which is the automatic tracking system with resumes. Expect more of that technology, unfortunately. So, it's very important with all this change going on to maintain your focus. So I had a quote in the book on page 7, I think it was, in Lindsay's book. It talked about, this is not a bug, this is a feature. If you're thinking that we're going to go back to anything, we're not. Or if you're thinking that this is a temporary, a blip or a fad, it's not. So start thinking about this being the new way, and it's not really going to revert too much. It's going to morph into something else, but nothing like we've seen. In terms of baby steps, this is the thing that Lindsay talks about a lot. I try and jump on her calls and sort of hear her own take on this. And there's a book by PJ Fogg, which you may be familiar with, called Tiny Steps. And he basically says, look, it's too daunting, especially during a pandemic, to try and take on some major program, whether it be diet or whether it be fitness or whether it be, a major job campaign. But if you break it down into very, very, very small parts, and you say, I'm just going to do this tiny thing, check the box on that, and then use that as the basis for the next few steps, it tends to work better, because under these kind of conditions, it's very much fight, flight, or freeze. And the freeze is sometimes the worst one, because you think you're okay, because you're like, I didn't lose anything. Everyone's most afraid of losing something. That's but you didn't gain anything either, and you're the last one to know that you're not making progress. So Lindsay's 5 rules. She talks about, keeping pace, and I apologize to George about using his pace again, but Keeping pace, K-PACE stands for knowing your non-negotiables, prioritizing action, asking for help, controlling what you can, and embracing creativity. So again, if you've got nothing else out of Lindsay's book, she always does tend to go through those 5 rules. And then when we talk about the buddy and the barter system, let me make sure I'm on the right thing here. Yep. The buddy or the barter system, this is what I use in LinkedIn a lot. I say, hey, you know, maybe you don't have a job for me, but maybe you have a piece of advice for me, or maybe you can direct me to a resource. And so when you do your outreach, and I certainly encourage you to practice that, please don't start saying, hey, have you got any jobs for me? Because that makes people have to sort of try and save face. But you can say, you know, I've been looking all over and I can't seem to find where this resource might be located. Can you push me in the right direction? And most people are willing to do that, or say, I don't know, but I have a contact who knows. Practice gratitude, of course. Thinking Fast and Slow, greatest book that I've come across in the books that I've read over the last 3 years by Danny Kahneman, Behavioral Economics. And basically he says, our tendency is to react first, and then only later, if we pause, to say, you know, in retrospect, I probably should have considered a few things and then done a slightly different response. So to the extent we can shift our response away from reacting and responding and into reframing to say, you know, my tendency would be to react one way, but now that I step back a little bit, it actually makes more sense to do it this other way. Inside out or outside in, basically that means recognize your biases. I have a resource for that. Excellent. If you need it, let me know. Volume down, volition up. What is volition? Volition is the power to use one's will versus battery power. You know, the able to conserve energy for when it's really needed. So again, we're all tapped out. Everybody's a little bit stressed. So I would say, you know, be very careful with your energy. What I tend to do is I'm an early riser. So I know if I schedule something towards the end of the day, it's not gonna be my best effort and I'm gonna be like struggling to get through it. But in the morning, forget about it. I've got my cups of coffee in me and I'm raring and ready to go. But you know, everyone's different. So figure out what that is for you and work with it. In terms of fail to learn versus learning to fail, there's a great quote in Lindsay's book where she says, athletes condition themselves to consider failures as opportunities to improve. And she uses hurdlers as an example. You know, you're gonna fall on your face a couple of times, but that's part of the learning process. And you know, you just sort of work that in. You expect that, and if you expect it, it doesn't devastate you. You don't just like stop completely. You just say, oh, I need to approach that from a different angle, or go higher or faster, or whatever it happens to be. So, you know, when we talk about the new path, you know, again, the point that Lindsay makes is that people have been conditioned to expect a slightly linear path, or, you know, the classic growth curve up, you know, zigzag but up. It's like, yeah, well, it's going to kind of zigzag sideways and down a little bit, and you need to factor that in and be able to talk about that. Sometimes people use vision boarding, which is you take visuals and you use those to help you maintain focus on your path. A little more morbid is what's called a pre-obituary. So it's like, if I were to pass untimely, what would be my legacy? What would people think about me? What will I have, you know, what will I be known for? And then knowing that you have time to fix that, hopefully a lot of time, you can kind of reorient yourself. In terms of hands-on practice and lifelong learning, yeah, I'm real big on role plays and simulations. I'm the type of person, you can tell me something and it's great and I'm fascinated, but I'm a little ADHD. Until I'm actually doing it hands-on, it doesn't sink in. And I have to kind of scurry to find my notes and say, what was that thing again? But if I do it a couple times, it gets locked in, and that does tend to work best. So as you're, you know, picking up your lifelong learning, if you're a hands-on learner, be aware of that fact. And there's different resources: LinkedIn Learning, edX, Future Learn, Coursera, which you're going to see later, webinars, apprenticeships, job shadowing, internships, returnships, self-employment, a lot of options. And 1% better each day. This was Saquon Barkley, if you're a New York Giants fan, and I'm also a Penn Stater. He had a quote a while back, shortly before his injury, his knee injury. And he goes, I'm just striving to get 1% better each day. And I was like, that's doable. You know, that's not so bad. And by flexing and pivoting and agilifying, as I say, you can cut your losses and build momentum and consistency. Okay, so really closer to the job search now in terms of clarifying and communicating your brand and career story. Understand that the online you is going to be different than the isolated you. Again, that whole idea of hibernation. There's a quote by Carla Harris in the book in Recalculating. Says, all major decisions about your career are made when you're not in the room. So, you need to be aware of that fact and make sure that you put yourself out there, as tough as that can be sometimes. Trading autonomy for security. Yeah. So this means you need to cast the widest net possible. And in terms of tell, do, flex, share, and lead, that's really sort of the priority. If you want to start off, you start by telling somebody, but then you do it, as I said, hands-on. And then you flex, you try and do it a different way. And then you share that knowledge with somebody else. You teach somebody else and it locks it in for you. And eventually you get to the point where you can lead with that skill set. But that's sort of those are like sort of the 5 stages of that. In terms of change versus irrelevance, there's a great quote by former military Eric Shinseki, who says, if you dislike change, you're going to dislike irrelevance even more. And yeah, so I mean, you need to be able to transfer your skills. That's a huge thing. It doesn't even matter what your skill set is to some degree, as the ability to pick up new skills. The whole thing, we'll get into it later about, unlearning and then relearning, be able to pick that up fresh and be coachable about it. And when I talk about that, people say, well, where do I do that? What areas can I do that in? And some of them, but I'll just list a few if you're not aware. Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Slack, SharePoint, Google Docs, Credential Engine, GitHub, Learning Lab, Microsoft Learn, Salesforce, Trailhead Academy. There's a bunch of like safer places where you can start to test the waters. In terms of working your contacts, again, face-to-face and virtually. Know, like, and trust is always important. What Lindsay talks about is Slack or Snapchat, or you go into your Starbucks when it's safe to do that. Eventbrite, we have Meetup. There's different freebies that you can get, free webinars. There's alumni you can ask, and college placement centers, which is the one that people always tend to overlook. You want to reach out to actual people. The tendency is always to rely on Alexa or Siri or Hey Google for answers, but if you talk to other people, you'll get nuances that will stand you out competitively. 70% of jobs found through networking, I'm sure that's probably not a shock to you, and the fact that rehired talent gets hired, or I'm sorry, referred talent gets hired 55% faster than applying through online career sites. So in any way that you can get a referral, I don't care if it's a janitor or if they are, in my cases, if you just say, I know somebody in there who can know someone, that is a huge help for you. One thing that Lindsay talks about in her webinars, she says, about a year ago, when people were first going through this pandemic, the thing that people typed into Google the most, which is encouraging, I guess, is how can I help? So that's the human element is huge. The soft skills, the emotional IQ, internet is more of a is a level playing field. Anyone can pull up the basics, but can you do better than that and then personalize it? One of the acronyms that Lindsay uses is SPEC, S-P-E-C, specific, proactive, enthusiastic, and consistent. And I'm going to mention, you've probably seen, again, a meme or a visual later in the presentation where the things that require zero previous talent or effort that people just forget to do. And we'll get into that. Another one that comes up in Susan McPherson's book, The Lost Art of Connecting, and the link is in the chat, is gather, ask, and do, which I call gadfly. Instead of waiting for the perfect networking opportunity, think outside the box, create your own opportunity. Join a local meetup group, volunteer at your neighborhood food pantry. When it's safe to do these things, of course. Ask, instead of leading with your own rehearsed elevator pitches asking for help, ask to help, which is what I just talked about. Opening the door to sharing resources, experience, contacts, and perspectives that add diversity to your own vision. And then the do piece is turn new connections into meaningful relationships by taking these newly formed relationships deeper and follow through on the promises you made and keep in touch. Again, this is fundamental stuff, but people just don't do it consistently. So we talk about virtual job hunting, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. But Lindsay is always like, "Hey, people don't go to their college career center, even as an alumni, and it's there. It's a resource people just don't use enough." In terms of precision bombing, yeah, be active. It's okay to apply to stuff. You're like, I don't meet all the specs on it. There was 30 bullets, and I only qualify for 15. You know what? Put it in there anyway, because there might be something else in your background that says, I just want to talk to that person. They didn't quite meet the spec, but there's something about them. It's just intriguing enough to have a further conversation. So don't be daunted by that. And then again, go deeper than Google and Wikipedia. Set up email alerts on job boards. Complete your profiles. People don't do this. Lindsay was saying that one of the complaints that she hears from hiring managers is that people don't. They have a referral. And so they say, well, I'm not going to go through the regular, process through the company website. It's like, no, you got to do both. And when you do that, don't just slap it together. I mean, literally make sure that everything that they ask for that they get, because if you don't, you get screened out for absolutely no good reason. So make sure that you complete that. Test the keywords. You probably know about jobscan.co, but that's a place you can do that. 75% of resumes are never read by a human. And so, you need to find ways around that. Career recalculation newsfeed. Okay, so if you're not already using tools like Twitter lists or target companies or Google alerts or following traded publications, now is a very good time to start doing that. You want to see from an insider's eyes, again, start to cite things that say, I've done my homework, I see trends in your industry, and here's where I could see myself making an immediate contribution. But of course, don't get so lost in analysis paralysis that you forget that you're in a job search, which is probably what I would do because I'm a very analytical person. So in terms of getting what you can while you can, I talked about making sure that you block time and you manage your energy. PI basically stands for performance 10%, which just gets you in the game. Image is 30%, and exposure is 60%. That's a Harvey J. Coleman quote. So again, the very fact that you're doing well, your job, and that you look the part is good, but that's only 40%. You have to actually be out there actively showcasing this. So this is where I talked about the 10 things that require zero talent. And again, this won't come as a surprise to most of you, but they're being on time, having a good work ethic, effort, body language, energy, attitude, passion, being coachable, doing extra, and being prepared. Basic stuff, but again, you don't always see it. And then the last slide or two before we take some questions. In terms of moving on up, connecting with recalculators. When I say if you were me, what do you wish you had known when you're in my situation? You can literally ask somebody this if you have nothing else to ask, and it's a great question because people are like, okay, now I can reminisce or go into my own experience and share my perspective. In terms of being in it to win it, if you're offered a chance to meet with someone, always take the meeting. Even if you're like, I don't know if this is going to produce anything, but you just don't know. There's things that you just can't predict, but take that opportunity. Generational treasure. Yeah, that's an opportunity to be optimized and leveraged. I have someone who is an indirect report to me who is 27 years old. She's about to get married this year. She's great, and she has taught me so much about a millennial perspective and to correct some of my boomer era habits that just for that alone, she would be worth it, let alone the work that she produces. So I would encourage, if you haven't done so already, and I don't have any young kids, so she's my exposure to that. But either way, make sure you factor in those generational perspectives. In terms of minding unpredictability. So basically what that means is failures can point you in a better direction. Don't be afraid to make small little failures. It's okay. No small parts, only small actors. Ask people around you about their own transition. What inspired them to change course? And almost everybody is doing some variation of that. So you'll almost always have something to talk about. And then again, this is the last slide I'll say before taking a couple questions. It's okay to change your mind. It's okay, to develop search skills that you can then apply in different situations. Depends, as I said before, the pandemic accelerated trends. You know, I have these two quotes here about necessity being the mother of invention. Well, I think that may be overstated. It's really more about what we're going to accomplish once we exit this survival mode. So, you know, people are like, oh yeah, you know, pandemics taught us so much. Right. Some of it's going to be limited to that time, but it's what you do with what's coming that's going to be the most important thing. And then literally the last slide of Lindsay's book is this fact that you're never alone on the road. And, you know, I had just finished a book on biases. And the biggest thing that people do, myself included, and maybe especially myself, is there's this tendency to say, I got it, you know, no trouble here, you know, I don't want to be a bother. I'll take it as far as I can take it on my own time. And, but then by the time you reach out, people have moved on or they're less willing to help you. So I would say don't feel bad about struggling. Everybody's struggling to some extent, but don't forget to reach out. You know, it's a natural tendency to say, people are struggling with so much, I don't want to bother them. It's okay. You know, phrase the right way, they'll be willing to be bothered. So with that, I'd like to take a couple quick questions on especially Lindsay's book. I want to hear your perspective on that.
Andy, if
Yes,
I
sir.
could, I'd like to share a comment.
Please.
The one thing in your presentation that really jumped out on me was just that casual synopsis of what happened from hiring a younger person from for your staff.
Yeah.
People out there in job search have to understand, especially because a lot of these millennials are now hiring managers,
Right.
that there really is a different perspective, a different mindset of how to do work, how to integrate data, you know, between different vehicles, how to communicate, how to collaborate. And to me, if you even just captured that into a presentation or even possibly a book, that is so mind-opening. You know, I actually benefit from similar situation where I work through a number of people that I interface with. And, you know, people that don't have that perspective or access to the ability to identify it and then determine how to integrate it into the way they approach problem solving, decision making, communication, collaboration, don't understand if they're going into an interview how they're just innocently answering questions but actually distancing themselves from being a cultural fit to the organization. And, you know, if there's a way that you could expand a little on that for the audience, I think it would be time very well spent.
Okay. Yeah, great observation. Excuse me. And there's at least two books I can think of, one of which I'm just finishing up. One is called Okay Boomer. I think it's by Jill Philosophic, or I think I'll get the resource. I actually have it in the other room. But the net is, she says, you know, you guys don't get it if you're talking to boomers. And there's a lot of reasons why you wouldn't get it, but you can get it, but you need to spend some time, as David said, in their world. And their world basically starts with catastrophe and then goes to the next catastrophe. All they've known is catastrophe. It usually started with 9/11, or if you're talking a little later than that, it started with the 2008 recession. But they have never seen, you know, quote unquote boom times. Like I know for the 1990s, in my case, was pretty good. The 80s were pretty good. This century, a little shaky, you know. I just got from Social Security office my, you know, they give you that income printout over your career, and you can see the spikes, and it's like, what was going on when that was happening? And then I thought back, I was like, oh yeah, that's when this recession was happening, when this, you know, crisis was happening. But that's all millennials have known, you know, so they expect the worst, and you know, they've got much more debt as a general rule than any of us ever had to deal with. So, you know, they've had to stop cut college short or extend it over a longer period of time or not even finish it, just things that we took for granted. So, you know, they've got a lot more. What's great about it, though, again, to the flip side of David's point is, if you spend any time with millennials, they just problem solve it on the spot. Like they'll text back and forth and be like, okay, not a perfect solution, but something we can implement now, go. And they'll just, you know, they'll exchange perspectives very quickly and then say, okay, we're going to get behind this one, even though, you know, it's not 100% consensus, and just do it. And they can knock stuff out like you would not believe, at least, you know, to my perspective. I'm like, wow, they really get cut through a lot of clutter quickly, and they've had to. That's been their whole life. So why not tap into that skill set? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, Valerie's got the book there in the chat. Thank you for that. And I can give you other ones later on offline if you need it. But great topic. Yeah, and by the way, Lindsay Pollock, I'm gonna make her look bad just for a second. There was a hit piece in the Wall Street Journal about 4 years ago where they chided her for charging about, you know, they claim, I think this is not accurate, but $20,000 an hour to consult on cross-generational, you know, career expertise. But she is that good, and she does give keynotes for quite a bit of money. Whether it was ever that amount per hour, I have no idea. But literally, you know, if you needed to speak to somebody, connect with somebody, you could do worse than Lindsay Pollock. And you know, one of the things in the chat is the strengths profile that she offers from her site. And I would encourage you to take it. It's a free strengths profile. She works with Capfinity, which is a strengths assessment program, and it doesn't cost you anything. So why not be aware of that before you find out the hard way that, you know, you're lacking in some areas. What other questions do we have, David?
Yeah, so Andy, excuse me, there is a question from Valerie asking, what is DICE again? I guess the acronym.
Oh, I'm sorry. DICE. Yep, no, not a problem. Yeah, that's a little more of an obscure reference, and I'll give that to you again. Sorry, I know I speak a little fast sometimes. Let's find it here. Not exactly top of mind. You know, the true thing of an acronym is whether you can remember it after you don't have it see it.
I think your comment was rolling the dice.
Yeah, rolling dice. Distributed income compensation enterprises. So in other words, rather than have like a formal corporate or organizational structure, there's sort of these loose confederations of resources that again are being, you know, assembled and disassembled on a more of a project basis. And I know, David, when you said in your opening, or when Frank said in his opening comments about how many project managers we have, that could be both exciting and terrifying, I guess. Because exciting because a lot of people are thinking in project terms rather than like hierarchical company terms, but also the fact that they assemble and disassemble pretty quickly and pretty agilely. You know, if people haven't started to study agile mindset by now, I guarantee you that they're looking at it as a result of the pandemic. So that's what that's all about.
Okay.
Other questions?
And to remind folks, if you have a question, you can type question, just the word question in chat. That's like digitally raising your hand. Or you can type the word question and type in your question like we just did, and we'll read it out loud. Yep. And as we're waiting for a couple more questions possibly coming in, just a reminder, after the program is over, a little later when Andy is finished and answered all of your questions, then we will keep the session open, this online session open. We'll turn the recording off, and it'll be like hanging around the meeting room together virtually, or our after party, if you will. So feel free to hang around with us a little bit later on.
Great.
And I don't see any more questions. We'll wait another moment or two just to see.
Yep.
Maybe some people are typing still.
And again, I've referred to this book multiple times, but if you want to know what it looks like, or that's the book. A lot of good stuff in there. And you know, again, because she presents so often as a keynote, it's not hard to figure out. It's really basic block and tackling, but it's a great refresher course for us.
All right, there are no other questions at this time, Andy, so why don't we just move along?
That's great. And you know, looking at the clock, I want to be fair to people's time and not, you know, hopefully keep it exciting, entertaining. So I'm going to go a lot faster through this next part. And I would say to you, just if there's something that you want captured in the after dialogue, please put it in the chat so we don't miss it. Because unfortunately, my tendency, and bad on me, is that I will over prep and literally have too much material to cover. and that's not fair to either, to you to do that. So I'll just kind of give you fair warning that I'm going to skip through some slides and kind of get to the things that are going to be more pertinent, I think, for this audience. So this is Bobby's book, and again, Bobby's book is Courage to Lead. I'll show that to you one more time again. Bobby is the one who's a friend of mine with the head and neck cancer. This is his book, or one of his books. And why is that important? Why is blazing your own trail important? Well, it's pretty much, like I said, you need to step out of your bubble that you've been in during the pandemic, and most people have been in some form of that. And you need to also relate to your emotional process. The rationality and emotion, they call it the rider and the elephant. If you were to Google that, you would find probably some old tale or parable or fable about the rider thinking that he's got everything under control, but the elephant of emotion is the one thing that runs away and causes the most havoc. So you've got to let those two things work together. And I talked about Danny Kahneman and thinking fast and slow. Thinking slow means recognizing that you think you're making a rational decision, but it's usually an emotional decision that you're rationalizing. You've already made a determination with your emotions, and then you're trying to find facts to back it up. So once you're aware of that, you're going to make better decisions because you're like, is this really an emotion driving it? Bobby talks about, RRAS, and I put these things in here. I'll tell you why later. But in that nutshell, it's just enough to get your Area 47 going in your brain. So it's like, okay, I need to either hang out to figure out what that means, or trying to find ways to disprove that. But either way, you're engaged. If I just tell you what it is, your mind turns off. But RRAS is record, reflect, act, and share. That's journaling. Now, Bobby just put out a newsletter or a blog that said, during this time of pandemic, people should be doing more reflective journaling, and yet he finds that for a variety of reasons, they haven't been doing it. And we wonder why that is. And I think what it is that it's a little terrifying for people to write things down. You take something out of your head, have it go through your heart or your soul, pour it out through your hand, the writing and doing things. It's almost better to just, people think it's better to just keep it all in, keep it internalized. But I'm telling you, once you get it out and you can look at it and respond to it and capture it and share it, you're going to get a lot more mileage out of those insights that I'm sure you've come across during these, these moments where you've had time to reflect. You've had to. So that's basically what he talks about there. I love this Michelangelo quote about carving the marble. And basically what that means is there's some essential truth, some essential value that's going to define you, that's going to make you successful or not. And usually it's not by adding things. Again, I've read like 400 books over the last 3 years, and I thought that was going to add something. But actually what I found that had the most impact was starting to subtract things from your life and seeing if it had any impact. And when you whittle it down to a certain minimalism, things that are absolutely essential to your character, and you can communicate that in your brand story, it's so powerful, much more powerful than just trying to append another, thing that might not be a strength of yours. And in terms of using influence and, all these different things that you see here, Bobby's got these different acronyms that he uses, he's real into his acronyms, and that's fine. But you want to be able to use, name a greatness. If we had more time to talk on this call, and I was in front of you in person, I might say, like, name something great that happened to you within the past 24 hours. And again, once you are anchored to that, once you are focused on that, it opens up all kinds of insights. You say, now that I think about that great thing, it reminds me of this other great thing, and you start to chain it and link it. That's the kind of dialogue when you do your outreach to folks as part of your job search, that they're going to respond to your confidence and to your positive attitude more so than the actual facts that you use. So it's a great way of sort of, again, reorienting your thinking. There's a book called Head, Hand, and Heart that talks about, the influence shifting from rational to more handiwork and more things that are emotionally driven. And so, again, I would encourage each of us to be aware of your rational side, but don't be limited by that. Don't stop with that. That's a starting point. That's table stakes. Most people know what VUCA stands for. It's volatile, uncertain, complex, or ambiguous. That's the new way of the world. So there's a book that I've yet to read, but it's called Embrace the Suck. It's a very, that's a military phrase. It's like, yeah, things stink right now, but so what? And so if you can accept that and say, well, what am I going to do with that? How can I make that, better? Show the initiative. I guarantee you're going to get that question if you're not already getting on a job interviews. Where they say, okay, what have you been doing all this time during the pandemic? And like, how are you spinning this straw into gold? And you need a good answer for that. Some of it's going to be, instead of people trying to get things from you, is like, what things are we doing for you? Adam Grant is wonderful in this regard. The author Adam Grant, he always talks about a giving economy, a servant leadership mindset. And so think about, what can I offer other folks, or how can I develop something along with other folks so that we can find that gift, develop it, and then give it. In terms of, Bobby has again another acronym for lose. How do leaders lose their leadership ability? And most of it is by forgetting the emotional component. So, you want to be able to have a direct conversation with your reports or your team, your small groups that you're working with. Really work on that. Really work on hearing the story. Make sure that they feel heard, that they feel seen, that they feel appreciated, they feel that they belong. That gets into diversity, inclusion, and equity, which again are other hot topics right now, but they should have been hot topics a long time ago. It just happens to be, teed up now as a result of the five horsemen of the apocalypse I talked about earlier. It's not going away. So start thinking in those terms as well. Again, you're all project managers, or a lot of you are, and so something like this, the strategy implementation roadmap, is going to probably resonate with you. But what I would encourage you to do, what Bobby talks about a lot in his book, is teach others by doing. So in other words, if I teach you, it's going to lock it in for me as well. It's going to make me better at that own skill set, even if I haven't completely mastered it. We had a speaker, I guess, last time, Breakfast Club, talk about LinkedIn, and I loved it because, I pride myself on doing pretty well on LinkedIn, but man, when I talk to some people who really do it well, it puts what I'm trying to do into perspective. I said, I got so much further to go. There's so much I don't know right now that I want to get better at. And that's, whatever your area happens to be, you want to have a reference point that says, yeah, I'm making progress, but there's some real masters out there that I'd like to get even closer to. In terms of daring greatly, this encourage iteration aspect. Yeah, we talked a lot about the headset. And again, I've got some things in here that are probably going to make too much sense to you, but I want to focus on the last one there, which is ants, spiders, or bees. And again, if you were to Google it, you'd find out that experimenters are like ants. They collect and use things. Spiders are more like, reasoners. They shape their own substance. But what you might want to aspire to is what bees are. And bees gather, information, they transform it, and they digest it. They make it part of themselves. They make it part of their identity. So that's very holistic. There's a tendency to pull information out of context. Again, this is something that you can help millennials with, because they just do searches or whatever, and they're like, here's this fact. And you're like, great, tell me where it fits, or tell me what's before or after it. No idea. So use that skill set that you have. And then the last book that I'll mention, and I'll just touch on this, is Stay on Course. And there's a temptation to excuse me, to get like far enough along in your search or your process, get derailed temporarily by something, and then just drop everything and just totally sunk cost. You're like, well, either we soldier on with something that's not working, or we stop something that could have been working if we just stayed with it a little bit longer. You don't want to do either of those two things. When I say flow your inner Chadwick, there's a famous story about Florence Chadwick, the swimmer in the 1950s. She was trying to swim from the Catalina Island in California to the coast, and fog settled in, and she lost her way a little bit. She didn't really know where she was. She was tired, and she's like, I just can't go another stroke. Fog lifts, she's, I don't know, 500 feet from the shore, had no idea that she was that close. So, to transfer the analogy to your own situation, if you're feeling down about something or you've just had a wrong turn on the road about your job search, I would say stay with it a little longer, just hang in there a little bit, and take those baby steps I talked about before. And more often than not, you'll be like, okay, that was just a freak thing. And if anything, because I stayed with it, I don't have to go do the rework, retrace my steps, and I can tell that as a success story instead. One of the books that Julie and her leadership at Novartis talk about this is Unlocking Leadership Mind Traps. And again, I think the link is in the chat. It's a change of perspective. You listen to learn rather than just trying to win or fix something. So again, I'm actively listening. I know that term is a cliche, but you really listen for emotional depth, for feelings, and try and relate to those first, and then you can go back to the rational stuff, with some credibility. Learning how to harness conflict versus pushing it away. Again, the temptation is to be, risk avoidance. I hate conflict as a general rule, but I've had to force myself, desensitization training, to put yourself in the heart of a conflict and just say, no, I'm going to stay with this until we figure it out. Letting go of control and creating the right conditions for growth. Yeah. So again, new leadership that you're seeing, you saw it with holacracy and some other trends that are happening, but basically self-managing teams. Entire whole books about that. No Rules is a great one, where they say, the management basically hasn't been getting it done and is not getting it done to open things up for future possibilities. But self-managing teams, absolutely. So that's a trend to keep an eye on. Scarcity being the mother of creativity. Yeah, so under pandemic, because we couldn't have certain resources, we had to get better at certain things and learn a lot of these different hacks. Case in point, with vaccines, I was literally just telling somebody in a dentist's office the other day, I said, I've been trying to get on this darn CVS thing for the vaccines, tried everything, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, no luck. And then I started to ask around and talk to people, and they're like, oh no, you got to do it this different way, where you come in through the state of Alabama, and then when you get through that screen, then you change it to the state of New Jersey. And by the way, they refresh the lists at 12 o'clock at night, so you want to sit up there at midnight and then keep refreshing your screen for a half hour, and you'll see things open up. I had no idea that there was this whole backstory, but because somebody took the time to share that with me, I could share that with somebody else, and then it, maybe it won't go viral, but that's the kind of thing where you say, let me just not rely on my own experience. Let me not just rely on first impressions from a online news story. Let me talk to people and see what their experience has been. And I guarantee you, you're going to get some insights, some, not all of which will pan out, but you'll have a lot more to work with than you did going into it. Some of you may have seen this visual about BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals. It only really works if you meet people where they live. And again, in pandemic times, it's like I see a lot of corporate chatter from Bayer, where I work, about, we did a survey and we found out this and we're doing that. But are they really talking to people? And when they talk to them, are they really listening to them? And when they listen to them, are they saying, okay, look, new set of challenges. Let's deal with your situation first and then bring it into alignment with our own situation. And they have to own it, they have to own it. So when you entrust people with that, again, because there's more self-management going on, self-care, you can cultivate that skill set, but there's a lot more folks saying, hey, look, I don't have the time or the bandwidth or the budget to manage you. At Bayer myself, our team was cut back by 20%, and the workload actually had increased, and we had to figure a way around that. And the only way to get through that was to literally sit there and workshop alternate ways of getting the work done. I like this visual as well. In terms about integration and enterprise mindset, it basically means of thinking not only about your own function or your own silo, but all the concentric rings that are around it. And where this comes into play in terms of the job search is, don't just talk about your immediate circumstances. Talk about things that you've learned during the pandemic, or people that you started to talk to, or trends that you see in your industry or the industry you're trying to get into, and go further out on the periphery here. where you connect with all these things that you see in the visual. I guarantee it'll differentiate you, because very few people are doing that. Most people tend to kind of go inward in this. They get closer to the self when you need to go have things pointing outward into the community and the organizations. And then this visual is called, I think it's called CONCEIVE, kind of an odd Welsh word, I guess. And this is just a way of, again, managing your circumstances. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but happy to talk about it in some other place. Life purpose, you've probably seen this visual as well. So if you're not already recalculating these aspects of your focus, you might want to use a little reflective journaling, as I talked about before, and really kind of address these things and see where they coalesce. And again, that's going to be your brand story. I'm doing a lot more work in the area of storytelling and branding, and it's where people bring this holistic or the synergistic perspective in and really get to the heart of it, that's going to resonate with the right audience for you. You'll know you're pursuing the right opportunities when you're in sync here. Virtual team cohesiveness. Okay, so this is the last piece of the puzzle. Iwan Juanes Ruiz teaches a course, Communication Strategies for a Virtual Age. And it's probably easier for me to talk more about this offline, because there's literally so much information on this. But he has a couple pointers, that may be helpful to you. So one of them I talked about earlier: just give enough of your idea for people to pursue their curiosity on their own, or to ask you probing questions. Don't put the entire story out in front of folks, because then they have too many things that they can disqualify you for. So give enough to intrigue them to say, tell me more. That thing you mentioned. Abby Kohut, I guess, who was a speaker a while, 1 or 2 sessions back, always talks about the fact that she was a table tennis champion, where in her region, and she had thrown that into, I think, a LinkedIn profile somewhere. And somebody, was like, I wouldn't ordinarily continue the discussion, but I have to know more about this thing that you mentioned. And that, she was able to take that dialogue and turn it back towards what she wanted, her job possibilities. And you can do the same thing. You can take something that initially seems like, oh, I don't know if that's pertinent or not, but it might capture someone's attention to have a further conversation. That's all you want. People don't just offer you a job when you connect with them. They want to say, well, let me, put you in front of my HR screener, and then let's see if, you get past that. So it's going to involve separate and further conversations. So give them something to converse about. And again, I talk about virtual hallway conversations. That's one of the first things that went away during the pandemic. You don't have these things where you're going for coffee, you happen to bump into the head of your division or your company, and you get to, ask them something, or at least, make them aware of your presence. So you need to sort of build in ways to do that. So FaceTime calls, giving people places to vent, ask questions, to gossip. Think about that in terms of your strategy. So again, how you address sensitive issues virtually for dealing with employees. This is the process that you follow. And again, I can go into some more depth offline, but you address it, you admit that you have something similar, you assess it by asking their perspective, and then you ask the best way to move forward. These are more for folks that are, if you're actually in a corporate setting or an organizational setting and trying to figure out a way to use virtual tactics to your benefit. Again, another acronym, sorry, I'm hitting with a bunch of these today. But when you're asking questions, you want to acknowledge where the question comes from, say that you used to believe that, but now you believe something slightly differently, and you're asking for confirmation on that new difference, and then you determine sort of where to take it, beyond that. So again, I know I'm skipping over these, and they're really good stuff. It's very information dense, but I just want to tee it up as tactics to pursue separately. Again, personalities. This one made me laugh because people, it's going to sound terrible to call myself a hostile personality, but I am one of those people that almost thinks like in military, be brief, be brilliant, be gone. So you need to say, here are your options to someone like me, and then let me pick one. There's going to be people who are uninformed, and they have a different approach. they're going to say, oh, I understand. Are you okay with that? You have to connect with them emotionally first before they'll hear your rational argument. And then there's the supportives who say, yes, 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 they're your cheerleaders, but it's really hard to get them to actually follow through and do what you want. So you have to approach them, a little differently. Then they mostly want to feel like their decisions are going to get the backing of the group. So keep citing people. Oh, your team seems to love the way you handle this, that, and the other thing. Would it be okay if you did this new thing that somehow relates to that same group consensus or opinion? Oh, okay. Now that the group's behind it, sure, I'll do it. So again, I apologize for skipping through these, but these are just more techniques. I'm going to kind of go to this last one here, which is the 5% rule. What's remembered, that leaves a general impression. I talked about this before, with the Abby Kohut thing. So think about the things in your background, in your job search, that people will like, oh yeah, Andy was the guy who read 400 books in 3 years, or whatever it is, whatever your unique handle or hook is going to be. Start thinking about your hooks, not necessarily oh, I was responsible for it. Yeah, nobody really has the time, or that's not going to stick with them. Avoid speaking with too many details too formally, in businessese, and all in third person. So I and you. When you're virtual, when you're on video, remember to have a good background and to smile. Just keep it light and approachable. In terms of being positional, easy to disagree with versus principle bargaining, that's where you get into the why, the meta, the underlying principle. And you encourage nudge or baby steps with a strategic question. What if? Or, Lindsay has one where, when people say, they'll say, well, Andy, you don't have this skill set. I say, I don't have this skill set yet. But I'm doing, and then take it and turn it where you want to go to show that it's not a weakness or shortcoming, but it's just something in process that you have thought about and you can do something with. And then moving from closed-ended questions to open-ended questions. That's the order that you want to pursue it. Open-ended questions create relationships, get them talking. Tell me a story about that. Tell me more about that. Get their point of view. What's your favorite 3 things? Make them feel important. And then move strategic. Again, what if, hypothetical, would you consider questions that begin in that way? So last thing that I'll talk about is area 47, which I call nutty brain. There's literally an almond-shaped part of your brain. It's not your pituitary, but it's probably around there, where you deliberately create uncertainty or curiosity in your opening. So people talk about elevator pitches. And the reason they don't work a lot is because they don't start with anything intriguing. They just say, I'm a person who does a blah, 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 blah. Start with the intriguing detail, get them hooked in, and then say, oh, yeah, we can talk about that, or we can talk about this other thing, but now you've opened the door. And so I have some resources offline I'm happy to share to go into that more detail. GOS is gold opportunity statement. Pinpoint a specific action plus something to measure. So in other words, if I go to you and I say, if I could help you organize your business, and do it, over the next 3 months and give you an efficiency increase of 10%, would that be of interest to you? The specifics are in there, and again, it opens up a separate conversation. The lazy rule, again, this is more about video. Same thing with the belly button rule. Belly button rule basically means when you're on camera, make sure that your belly button is facing forward and that your hands don't clasp together but stay apart. These are just body language things that tend to help. Again, I wish I had more time to go into them, but I'm happy to pursue it. And so I'm going to close up there just to give people time for questions and further dialogue. I thank you for attending, and like I say, a lot of the links to these resources are in the chat, and I'm happy to provide them offline as needed. And again, thanks for your attention.
Great, thanks, Andy. Let me go look at the questions. There's one from James about some of the books.
Sure.
You mentioned a lot of authors and books. A lot of this seems like Brené Brown. Have you heard of her? And if so, what are your thoughts on her books?
Oh, Brené Brown, yeah.
Brené, okay, I don't know her yet.
Oh yeah, Brené Brown is brilliant, especially in the areas of vulnerability. And that's the proverbial, iceberg. You only see a tip of what people show, but the real connection aspect is below the waterline. And she's always talking about, and if you're not willing to be vulnerable, if you're not willing to sort of, make your mistakes in front of your leads or your group, you're going to be a lot less effective. They're not going to feel an affinity for and with you. They're not going to want to sort of connect with you and support you when you're not in the room, as I talked about earlier. So yeah, Brene Brown is absolutely brilliant. I can certainly recommend a bunch of resources for her offline if needed. But I would say that at the very least, if you follow her, and I do a lot of following on my social media, she's great, and you'll get a lot out of just about anything that she shares.
One observation I had also, I think it was just a moment ago, was your GOS and no phrase.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it, if I will you.
Yeah.
That kind of framework, which is,
right.
If I do this or make this effort,
mm-hmm.
will you consider this alternative?
Yeah, I like that.
And you fill in the blank. If I blank, will you blank? And so it's something that I've used sometimes. So it sounds very similar.
Yeah. Again, you want to open those doors any chance that you have to kind of go deeper into the dialogue, but make people think that they were driving it, not you pushing it off on them. Another one I've heard is, instead of saying but, try and change those buts to and. Oh yeah, I ran through an obstacle instead of but, which immediately puts people on defense to like start to nitpick. You say, and I did this other thing that seemed to resolve it. So before they have a chance to think of you as a potential problem they have to manage, they're like, oh no, you managed yourself. That's great, and I can take the credit for it. Oh, you're my new best friend.
Yep. There's a question from Joe, which I actually answered in chat, but I'll read it. Could you please repost the links you mentioned at the beginning? Well, you certainly can, Andy, if you'd like. Yeah. But remember, it's in the chat. You just kind of have to scroll up. That's one way. Yep. The other is, excuse me, a little later today, we will make the chat available. Adrian will post the chat log in the Breakfast Club website, and I posted that link where you can find it just 2 chat quotes ago. So it's on the Breakfast Club website in the About Us page under speakers. So look at that recent link, and you'll see for each of our presenters who've provided us information, or we have the chat log, it's posted there. And also this video, probably by tomorrow, will be posted on our YouTube channel. So you can check the Breakfast Club New Jersey for the YouTube channel, and also considering subscribing to the channel so you do get notifications when there's posts and other information. So it's the regular youtube.com, and look for Breakfast Club. There is also a link on the Breakfast Club website, thebreakfastclubnj.com. There's a link to the YouTube there as well.
Yeah. So David, I see a question from Pranav. Says, how do you communicate in the interview for a new IT project where you do not have any experience in the past? And ironically enough, a question similar to that came up in Lindsay Pollock's webinar the other day. And I think she basically said, there's a lot of merit to going in and saying, before someone can say it for you, even though, going into our and button yet type of approach, even though I don't have immediate experience with this particular product, what I do have experience in that relates to this product is X, Y, and Z. And let me briefly tell you how I have done that, or how we would do that together. So again, you literally kind of leapfrog over that to say it's not a hard obstacle, not a hard wall that you're throwing up with a question like that. It's just, oh, okay. I can tell you that, if you were to give that to me, even though I haven't worked with that one in particular, I have worked with these ones that are very similar to that, might have even, influenced that particular product in some way. And so it'd be a very, very quick learning curve for me. Not a problem. Again, the facts are easy to pick up. The hardest thing today to sell yourself on is the emotional component. Are you going to be someone I'm comfortable working with? Are you going to be a person who's going to be coachable, who can follow as well as lead? I can teach you the other stuff generally.
Yeah, and Andy, what you're talking about really are what's called soft skills. Mm-hmm. The hard skills are, do you have this tool to do the job?
Right.
But the soft skill really talks about how you do the job. So you may say, no, I don't use Excel pivot tables, but here's the approach I took to get the results that I wanted. And you can understand that you can explain your workflow and your thought process. Tools can be taught. soft skills really can't be. They have to be really taught over time and honed over time. So sell your soft skills.
Absolutely, and sell your character and sell your principles. Say, because this is a core value of mine, throughout my life, immediately people are like, well, okay, good, so I don't have to worry about this you're just being performative on the interview, and then this thing that attracted me mysteriously goes away when I hire you.
So for folks, any other questions, just quickly just post the word question in chat, and please post that under the name of everybody so that both Andy and I can see it. If you post it just to Andy, well, he can see it too, but I can't moderate. But if you have a question, please do so. We got another minute or so before we wrap up. And remember, once we wrap up, we'll turn the meeting over in a moment to Frank, but once we wrap up, we'll leave the session open with the recording off, and we can just hang around the virtual meeting room. So there is one from Ravi.
Yep.
How do we focus on my key strengths if there are too many things being asked when applying for jobs? Each has different requirements, and my skills do not match.
Right. So quick, again, this is going to be an oversimplification, I realize, but a lot of that, let me back up. When I was studying crisis communications, they always said, they cited Henry Kissinger, who again might be before some people's time. He was a famous diplomat. And Henry Kissinger had a line that said, who has questions for my answers, when he would talk to reporters. So in other words, no matter what question you're going to ask me, I've already determined what my answers were going to be. I'm going to take the basis of your question, take it, pivot, turn it, contort it in some cases, but ultimately what I'm going to end up responding to is an answer that already coincides, resonates with my strengths. So don't be cowed by the question necessarily. Try and figure out the linkages to say, the more I think about your question, you ask this, but I think what you're getting at is X, Y, and Z. And it just so happens that I have a lot of experience with X, Y, and Z. And I'd be happy to go deeper into that with you. So, again, that's a gross oversimplification, but there's a tendency to take things at face value, and very few things, unfortunately, during the interviewing process are at face value. A classic case being, tell me about yourself. They don't really want to hear your life story. What they want to hear is, how you're going to immediately or almost immediately contribute value to justify their investment in you. That's what they really want to hear. So understand what the real question is behind the question, and then answer that question. Let's see, second question is,
Robbie has a second. Yeah. Is it good to look for my next role in my same company if the company is good, but I'm stagnant in my current role and department for a decade?
Yeah, that's a good question. Wow. Let's think about that. So next role in my same company. Yeah, if you've been stagnant in that same role, there's a certain safety to staying there, but that's a deceptive safety, I would say, because things are changing. Some of the best jobs that are going to come out the pike haven't even been determined or named yet. So I would rather say, to reconceptualize your strengths and say, although I'm already good here, and I can certainly continue to do this indefinitely, what I'm passionate about, where I'm heading, where I'm thinking about, is in this new area, and here's how that coincides with where the company or the industry seems to be going. So if you want to talk about that, we can have that discussion instead. And you cover yourself on both bases. You can say, well, sure, we can continue to do this, but you're going to get more out of me, and you're going to benefit, win-win, if we try this other area or this other direction. Thanks, David, for that.
Okay, yep, terrific. And any other questions? Going once, going twice. Not sure if anyone has posted to you directly, but
sure. And to that point, the best way to get on my radar and vice versa is through LinkedIn. I do check that literally several times every day. I know not everybody does. It came to me as a great awakening to realize that some people only check it once a month, especially if they're not in the active job market, which to me is almost heresy if they don't check it that frequently, but that's just me. But that's where you can find me and connect with me. And the good news is, even if you don't care what I have to say, which is perfectly fine, you might care about what some of the people I'm connected with have to say, one of whom might be Brene Brown or people like that.
Okay, So, well, I guess we've now reached the end of the meeting, so I will in a moment just turn it over to Frank. Before I do, just two things I'd like to say is, first of all, thank you so much, Andy. This was really insightful, a lot of great information. This was one of those presentations that's very thought-provoking. We should be able to take a lot of information individually for ourselves, and I hope everyone has that opportunity.
Yep.
And the other is the Breakfast Club does meet every second Saturday of the month. So we will be right back here on May 8th, virtually. Our presenter is Ken Scher, career coach Ken Scher, handling difficult interview challenges. So as you prepare for your interviews, whether virtual or in person, you may want to a taste of that presentation as well. So, and just before we wrap up and keep the mics open, just want to turn the microphone one more time over to Frank Kovacs as we wrap up the program today.
I thank, David and Jerry for getting Andy to speak today. I feel that Andy has planted a lot of seeds here for people. If you're in transition, and you've ever walked away from an interview feeling that you've done well, and then you're wondering, why you weren't selected, why you didn't get that offer, and, you're really wrestling in your mind, I think you need to take this presentation, really take it to heart, and think about this presentation and go through it a few times and say, what is it here that I don't know? Okay, there's a lot of great data points and thought-provoking information that Andy has shared that, each individual needs to go on their own personal journey of determining, what is it that you don't know that you may be communicating through body language, through answers, through sharing the way you would approach something, or just even in casual conversation that, may be distancing yourself, without you even fully being aware of it from the interviewer and from that position that you're seeking. So really, please go through this presentation, go through the deck. I know Andy's a wonderful guy. If you send him emails, he'll probably even elaborate on points or, provide further answers for you. But this is the heart of the matter, really, because we do so much time in investing in the resume, in the LinkedIn profile, even standard questions. But, as Alex Freund always talks about in every one of his presentations, the big decision point in a hiring manager is on what we call cultural fit. And what this presentation to me addresses is different points you may not currently be aware of in how you're signaling that potential hiring manager whether or not you're that cultural fit. So because it's such a critical piece to, be seen positively as being the person with that fit, this presentation is really something you should sink your teeth into and really go through it and do some self-awareness around it. That's my suggestion to everybody. And I really feel that if you do that and you come away with a few points that you're able to modify, that might be the missing link in you getting the offer on the next job you pursue. So thank you, Andy.
Thank you. Yeah, they say for the librarian, which I was briefly a part-time reference librarian at Rutgers, they say the perfect librarian is someone who knows nothing but can find anything. I'd like to think I know a little bit more than nothing, but I can probably help you find just about anything. So if you're having trouble, I mentioned a bunch of different resources, and you say, what about that resource about unconscious bias or whatever? Great. I've got any number of links for you to explore, and I promise you they won't overwhelm you if we focus on specifically what you're after.
Terrific. Thank you very much once again. So everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. We hope to see you virtually at least very soon. And we'll simply say goodbye, everybody.